Thank you all for coming here and for joining us today. So, my name is Blake Creamer, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. I would like to ask if Jane Welsh could share a few words of introduction. Jane is the co-chair of the International Federation of Landscape Architects Climate Action Group, and I'll pass the mic over to her to welcome us.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm so very honored to welcome you to this session of our IFLA Climate Action webinars on landscape adaptation or climate resilience. I'm a landscape architect. I live and work in Toronto, Canada, and I've had the privilege of leading many innovative and progressive climate actions, such as the Toronto Green Standard, which sets sustainable performance measures for new development, and the Green Roof Bylaw, which resulted in the construction of over 1,200 green roofs on large buildings in Toronto. So the webinar series covers topics of importance to climate action: biodiversity, nature-based water systems, heat, coastal flooding, nature-positive cities, water-sensitive urbanism, wrapping it all up with the voices of youth and a compendium of actions. And it's focused on different global regions. Today is the Americas. We also have it focused on Asia Pacific, Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. So I'm delighted today that we have Shannon here to share how landscape architects are leading one of the largest infrastructure projects in North America, of course, located in the city of Toronto. And the webinar is a result of many, many volunteers, all of the presenters today included. And I and also, of course, our climate action group. But I'd like to most especially thank Carly Benos, who is designed the organization and content of the webinars, and also to Blake for stepping up to moderate this session today. So stay tuned for future webinars this spring, and remember, landscape architecture is climate action. Back to you, Blake.
Thank you very much, Jane. So I would also like to thank Carlos Bueno Rivero, who is a part of the Climate Action Group and has really led the effort for this webinar series and helped bring together all of our wonderful guests here today. So again, my name is Blake Creamer. I'm the moderator for today's session, and I'm a landscape architect based in Montreal, Canada. I would like to take a moment before we begin to invite each of you to take a moment of gratitude for the place where you are. If you plant your feet firmly on the ground in front of you and breathe in the air around you. We acknowledge that for myself, we're on the unceded traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, the Mohawk Nation, the keepers of the eastern door of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and a place long known as Tinonake, a place of many nations. We also recognize today that we gather from many territories across the world, each carrying its own Indigenous history and presence, and we honor their past, present, and future connection to these lands. Thank you. So, in today's session, we'll hear from an esteemed and inspiring group of women working across the full spectrum of what climate resilience actually demands, from the institutional muscle required behind a $1 billion urban flood infrastructure project to community and student-led co-design along rural riverways, traditional ecological knowledge in conflict-affected territories, to agroforestry and collective action pedagogy. Building a landscape-led future requires all of this work at every scale, and I have no doubt that the work shared by our presenters today will challenge and inspire us. So we have 4 speakers today. Each will be presenting for approximately 15 minutes, and it will be followed by commentary and a discussion led by our guest panelist, Dr. Heike Rahman. Dr. Rahman is a senior lecturer at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology in Melbourne, Australia. She's a distinguished author and director of IFLA's Technology and Innovation Working Program. Heike will look forward to hearing from you after the presentations. So first we'll hear from Amy Whitesides. Following that, Carolina Segura Ball, Shannon Baker, and finally from Maria Gabriela Travado. So without further ado, I'll invite Amy to share her screen, please. Amy is a design critic at the Harvard Graduate School of Design and former director of resilience at Stoss Landscape Urbanism. Her research has been recognized by the Landscape Architecture Foundation and the American Academy in Rome. Amy, we're really glad to have you here with us today. Over to you.
Great. Thank you, Blake. Can you hear me and see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. So hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. I just want to say thank you, first off, to Blake and IFLA for the invitation to talk today. And I thought it might be fun today to share something a bit more exploratory and a kind of pedagogical approach. And this is work that began with my own research as part of the Landscape Architecture Foundation's Fellowship for Innovation and Leadership, which was the initiating spark for some ongoing or an ongoing seminar that I'm teaching at the GSD that's titled Forest and Fields. And I'll share a bit of my thinking about it, as well as some of the work that has come out of it from the students. Before I jump into that, however, I wanted to offer a quick intro into my background, kind of leading up to this, just for context, and perhaps may inform some Q&A afterwards. Let's see if I can get, there we go. So prior to my current role at the GSD, I worked for 10 years at Stoss, where I engaged in projects across scales, locations, and design phases. And in the last few years of my time there, I served as the director of resilience, so leading our portfolio of climate adaptation and mitigation projects, primarily focused on coastal adaptation and risk reduction in the Boston area. These range from the city scale to the parcel scale. And probably the highlight of this was that I had the pleasure of initiating and leading our Moakley Park project along Boston's harbor for about 6 years. And that project continues to be ongoing. Just prior to transitioning from Stoss to teaching full time, I also co-led the city of Boston's urban forest plan. And working on the forest plan really got me thinking about people's relationship with trees and the many roles that they play in our lives, including their role in adaptation to climate change related impacts of heat and in sequestering carbon, thus mitigating carbon emissions. And in conversations around carbon drawdown, trees are given a lot of airtime. However, in this context, they are embroiled in a kind of commodity-centric approach to adaptation and mitigation. One in which we make trades, we sell carbon, we calculate how much that might allow us to continue a kind of status quo approach to economics and daily living in the face of environmental disasters. And I wanted to look at practices that kind of bridged this divide, which were part of the discussion of carbon drawdown and ecological benefit, but which also derive from more complex, nuanced, and slow practices of engagement with the land. And so I began with agroforestry as an entry into this. Agriculture is a significant source of global carbon emissions, and in the United States, some estimate it's responsible for about 11% of annual emissions. In recent years, agroforestry has been recognized by many as a kind of having the potential to sequester carbon and help move the ag industry toward carbon neutrality. Just a kind of what is agroforestry? It's a worldwide practice. It's derived from, or in some locations still is, a significant part of indigenous or subsistence forms of land stewardship. And in short, it involves the addition of trees or tree crops into agricultural lands, or in some cases, productive understory into existing forest lands. Practices are known to improve soil, reduce erosion, capture runoff, improve animal welfare, support biodiversity, sequester carbon, and enhance socioeconomic resilience of farmers. In the United States, there's 5 practices that predominate and are recognized by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And these include alley cropping, which is really annual or perennial crops planted between the rows of trees. We have silvopasture, which is essentially livestock underneath a productive canopy. Forest farming, which is the cultivation of herbs, mushrooms, or crops under forest canopy. And then windbreaks, which are really just protective rows of trees that buffer fields from strong winds, and riparian buffers, plantings along waterways that capture runoff. So these 5 practices are one way of describing agroforestry, but it's also a range of products from maple syrup, mushrooms, honey, fruits, nuts, meats, timber, wool, baskets, products that are really deeply embedded in our daily lives, but which are often cultivated in extractive and unsustainable ways and can go unrecognized as the results of human nature co-production. So in 2017, agroforestry practices were reported on roughly 2% of American farms. It's a small but growing portion of American farming. And over the course of my research, I visited a range of these sites and practices, including farmers and researchers throughout the US. And I was impressed by this creative and tireless way in which they're working to transition farmlands into agroforestry to improve their ecological value and to make a living in a really difficult industry. And I also looked at sites that were not agricultural, as I didn't want to replicate the work of agroforestry experts, but rather to imagine how landscape architecture can learn from it, contribute to it, or expand on it. To speculate on how and where there exists the potential to expand beyond farmlands and integrate agroforestry into public landscapes of co-producing that increase biodiversity while fostering climate resilience and alternative futures. So a few projects I encountered along the way hinted at opportunity for these overlaps, primarily in riparian buffer systems and marginal lands where restoration and design are kind of in a space of overlap. So here in Hudson Valley, we have a newly implemented riparian buffer that's providing an example of adaptation of existing funding structures for restoration, in this case, the Conservation Reserve Program, that is here utilizing a range of kind of edible species within the buffer. So it's kind of implementing a bit of an agroforestry system within that, within the buffer region. Along the Missouri River, this installation by the Nature Conservancy and Missouri River Relief is demonstrating a larger public-facing riparian system that negotiates between corn and soy fields on the one hand, while adding productive fruit, nuts, and bees for honey into a waterfront that's offering public access to the river. And then, while not agroforestry itself, the ongoing work of post-buyout reforestation in New Jersey suggested to me the potential for a layered ecologically or even culturally productive system with public access. So when I began this work, Inflation Reduction Act funding through the US Department of Agriculture Climate Smart Commodities grants were supporting agroforestry in record amounts. And money from these grants and other private funding sources primarily funded best practices research and implementation at a parcel by parcel level. These funds were a huge lift for researchers and farmers working to overcome barriers to implementation. That is until they were canceled by our current government. I think their cancellation reflects significant weaknesses in common models for funding change. National funding such as this is notoriously volatile. It's sensitive to changes not only in political party, but in kind of issues of the moment. And arguably, I think the resilience and quality of our food system and our adaptability to environmental risks shouldn't be an issue of the moment. And while I am supportive of getting things done with the immediately available mechanisms, I wanted to explore a future that disrupted this commodities-based language and the model through which these actions have been taking shape. So my research into agroforestry and this course, Forests and Fields, emerged as a way to explore practices that operate in the time of trees, that embrace a land ethic that rebuilds relationships within the natural world. In other words, what I like to call slow practices. So in the course, students are asked to examine agroforestry and concepts of collectivity and slow practice through the lens of a single tree species. Not to remove it from its ecological context, but to give them a place from which to start that allows them to describe immediately complex webs of social and ecological relations. So in the course, we spend time in the field getting to know these trees and the humans that cultivate with them and utilize the various offerings. And from here, students build on these relationships to propose an intervention or a new future that relies on multiscalar biodiverse thinking centered around a single plant that is both tree and crop. And the future is described through a field guide, which is sort of loosely defined. The aim is a guide that reframes and advances kind of new plant-human relationships. Um, and I think a broad range of really wonderful responses kind of has emerged. So here we see work from Connor Gravel. Connor was an architecture student who really came to the class because he didn't really know anything about trees, in his words. And he focused his study really on marginal urban lands in New York City and the potential of poplars to remediate soils over time. And Connor's new relationship kind of really focus in part on the afterlife of the tree and in the form of this sort of memorial parade that weaves through the city and celebrates the work done, or in his words, the generosity of the poplar. So this sort of, for him, this course was really about learning this appreciation for trees. Um, well, meanwhile, Mauricio Cohen-Kalb, who is a student of landscape architecture and a resident of Mexico City, really focused on the city's ongoing struggles with water through the lens of a native willow, the Salix bonplandia. His study looked at legal frameworks that identify new territory in which the cultural and ecological uses of willow might be cultivated. So here we see as lake levels are falling, there's an area of exposed land that emerges, that is sort of a no one's land. It kind of falls into um, like this new territory, essentially. So it's due to its having previously been considered water and thus technically property of the nation. It is therefore public realm. And so it offers an opportunity for this kind of new productive public at the water's edge, where he's thinking about both riparian buffering, but also things, craft and other kinds of work that may be done with willow that are deeply culturally rooted. And then lastly, Keaton Bruce, who was one of our Masters of Design students with a background in architecture, really fully took on this edict of slow practice through a critique of suburban mail order home construction and the kind of monocrop forest ecologies that these and other rapid on-demand practices, as well as carbon trading systems, kind of tend to promote. So his project, titled House Not Included, offers the buyer the raw material to build their home in the form of 40 loblolly pines. This comes along with the instructions for care prior to building, which would take place some 30 years on. So in Keaton's kind of Future in 40 Pines, the guidebook here is a manual to a long-term relationship with one's home that begins with unboxing and moves on to planting, care, grazing, harvesting, building, and eventually living. In his words, what arrives in the box is not architecture, but the obligation to begin one. And the house is eventually a space in which living is not occupancy alone, but an ongoing practice of care tied to the slow cycles that produced it. So these projects are an ongoing exploration. They're an investigation into alternative futures that respond to the climate crisis through change in our daily lives and our relationships to plants, not as commodities or solutions, but as entities with the time and needs of their own. They find entry into this into this future through existing systems and spark conversation and imagination, sort of away from a tendency to approach crises through an optimization lens. And while a 30-year cycle of mail order to space sort of, sorry, a 30-year cycle of mail order house to space to living is certainly not going to solve our housing and affordability crisis. And I think at the same time, critiques like this of our current approach importantly place sometimes conflicting human and environmental needs into dialogue, which is, I believe, a great space from which to build new relationships. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. That's wonderful. Our next presenter is Carolina Segura Ball, a landscape architect, community planner, and senior lecturer at the University of Kentucky. Her multidisciplinary community engaged studio creates nature-based solutions along Kentucky's rural riverways, bridging landscape practice and planning with a commitment to making design meaningful at the community scale. Welcome, Carolina.
I forgot to unmute. Uh, Thank you, Blake. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ifla, for the invitation. My name is Carolina Sigarbel, and I'm a senior lecturer in the Landscape Architecture Department at the Martin College of Agriculture, Food, and Environment at University of Kentucky. I've been teaching here at the University of Kentucky for the past 15 years. Prior to that, I practiced landscape architecture design workshop in Colorado, and I have a degree in architecture from the Catholic University in Cordoba, Argentina. So again, the work that we've been doing, I've been teaching this studio, an upper level studio in the Bachelor's of Landscape Architecture program. And it's been quite interesting in the past 4 years. So, and I think it's because it's been such a great combination of three key elements: the learning, the engagement with the communities, and more opportunities for discovery and research. So for our students, it provides opportunity for applied learning, so hands-on, really thinking about real projects and how to take a project from beginning to end. For the communities, I think it inspires them to think about their communities in different ways and further progress. And for me as an educator, it's very rewarding to see success of the students, but at the same time, being able to help our small communities in Kentucky. So the presentation will show a little bit of some of the partners that they have made this work a lot more meaningful, some of the resources and methods that we use on our creative design process, and then a couple of couple of examples of that showcase a little bit of the student work. So prior to 2022, that was during COVID time. Students didn't have the chance to get outside and explore other areas in Kentucky. And at the same time, in 2022 is when I attended a presentation by Dr. David Wicks. He's an environmental educator, former vice chairman of the Ohio River Way organization, and I was able to attend one of his presentations that talks about it was a website where you can see live information on location of boat ramps, bike routes, water quality through this kind of 275-mile stretch in the Ohio River. The Ohio Riverway extends from 200 and something miles from Portsmouth to West Point, and it was founded back in 2020. So they did all kinds of like community engagement in collaboration with the National Park Service to see how prepared all these small towns along the river are in terms of providing opportunities for recreation and tourism. So when I started working with the Ohio River Way, I started learning a lot more about the Ohio River Valley and it's and the immensity of it, and thinking I don't know, how overwhelming sometimes when you think about the preconception of the Ohio River as a very polluted commercial waterway, and how working in smaller communities could create an impact and change that preconception of something that is more directed towards tourism and recreation. So on that 274-mile stretch, there are like 14 kind of like small towns, some larger towns or cities like Louisville, of course, and 20 something counties along that stretch on either side of the river, also including Ohio and Indiana. So it touches the Ohio River, it touches 6 states along the way. But then when you start getting to know the Ohio River Way and the work that they're doing, it changes your kind of like attitude towards something that is a lot more hopeful. So there is a great organization that is trying to push for an Ohio River Valley with communities that have unique natural environments, unique history, and communities, and looking into protecting this and offering opportunities for the residents, but also for visitors for recreation and tourism. Last year, I think back in September, it finally got a designation of 308 miles of a national water trail. And then the Kentucky Ohio River Regional Recreation Authority, they just passed a legislation just to promote recreation and tourism. And they're on the works with all the county that share that waterfront to get approval. And hopefully will be more resources for these communities in the future. So how did the project came to be? Well, we started it back in the fall semester. Fall semester is like 16 weeks. And we work in a small town of Carrollton. The work that the students did, it was so inspiring that we got contacted by Trimble County. Trimble County has a small town in Milton that is about 700 in population. A lot of this investment because it's right on the waterfront and gets flooded quite often. So we again took the students to work on their project, learn about the community. That was the first time that our studio was sponsored by the judge executive that saw the benefits of doing this type of work, and we got the chance to spend a couple of days exploring Milton and Trimble County and the Ohio River. In 2024, I got contacted by Blueprint Kentucky. Blueprint Kentucky is a labor unit within the college that does a lot of like community engagement, looking at opportunities for community and economic development. And they asked me if I wanted it to be the design lead for their summer fellowship, which is a great opportunity also to work on multidisciplinary teams. So at that point, with the fellowship is a full time paid fellowship, multidisciplinary students from history, forestry, natural resources, architecture, product design, and all working together. And we did a couple of things, one for project for Maysville that I will show in more detail. And then we came back to Trimble County again to work on the other small town of Bedford. So Milton is right there, Bedford is right there, and thinking about kind of like a plan for the whole county with Bedford as the heart of Trimble County. When we were working on the project in Maysville, we got the chance to meet with Dr. Brian Storrs, who is the one of the water basin coordinators for the Licking River Water Basin. And I got the chance to learn a lot more about water in Kentucky. So the state of Kentucky, I think, is the second state with the most waterways after Alaska. And the Division of Water for the state of Kentucky, they're looking into transforming some of the areas on the floodplain, areas that could be used for retaining water, but at the same time providing opportunities for recreation. So there are many, many towns, small little towns along our waterways, and it's just embedded on their history of these towns that were looking for water resources and fertile valleys, and that's how the towns evolve. And now are under a lot of pressure with the flood issues. So the state of Kentucky is doing a lot on trying to transform, thinking about nature-based solutions to help with flood, but at the same time turning into places for people for recreation. So all the work is being quite interesting. For the past 4 years, we have done presentations for Ohio Riverway Coalition and ASLA conferences, and we got into the newspaper quite a few times, and we did a presentation in Trimble County 3 weeks ago, where we learned that the small town of Milton received $5 million grant for purchasing properties that are in the floodplain, which is the largest grant funding that town has gotten in its whole history. So how do we go from knowing nothing about these small communities to creating some visioning for it? Well, we have all these partners that they bring a lot of their knowledge and resources, and we put our students to exercise their creativity. So we have drafted and keep tweaking this process that has maybe eight different steps on the design process. But I think a key part of it is step 1 and 2, where we really dive into understanding these communities, either going there, collecting primary data, doing our readings and our research. When we do the summer fellowships, we get the opportunity to canoe the Ohio River. And then we also looked at several case studies that inspire students to see other projects and think about other possibilities that could be applied to our small towns. And we do a lot of thinking until we find what is this problem that we want to solve and what's our big idea and solution. The process also involves a back and forth collaboration with the community, just to make sure that we are listening, responding to their needs, but also thinking big on what is the vision for the future of these towns. So a few of the resources that we use: First Impressions program by Blueprint Kentucky, which help us think about the first dive into these communities. We do a search through websites and social media and find what's the character of these communities. We use a lot the Rivertown review toolkit developed by the National Park Service, and is a good guidance for us when we go and visit, to observe and quantify trails, infrastructure, parking, lodges and hotels, all these kind of elements that will contribute to biking, paddling, and tourism. We go and collect a lot of data on site, and I think it gets for the communities when they see things like this, when we measure heat in these places and the lack of vegetation, it helps them kind of like think about transforming these kind of like downtowns in areas that could be a lot more comfortable for locals and also for tourists to be in there and be part and do activities as a community. Um, History is a big part of any of these small little towns, so we always have some students that they look into the historical significance of these places, not only the history, but historical features that maybe they're not there anymore, but they deserve to be resurfaced and highlighted. And of course, if we're designing for the river, we need to get students into experience the river. So when we do the summer fellowship, we get the chance to spend 2 or 3 days canoeing a few miles of that stretch along the river. It's a great bonding experience and a great way to understand and really get to love the Ohio River. And it's much better experience than seeing it from above when you're crossing a bridge. Um, and of course, when we go back to the drawing table, we use the Landscape Architecture Foundation as one of primary design guidelines to be able to understand other case studies, to have a set of different kind of elements in there that we need to pay attention to. And it helps a lot to the students to start thinking about these combination and the co-benefits of thinking about the environment, the community, and the economics. So looking at few examples of it, our fall semester, last semester, we work in the town of Manchester, around 3,000 people, I believe. And this is a project from one of the groups, and their big idea was all centered along the river and how do we restore that connection between the communities and the river. They also look at, maybe 3 different key things that will be part of their big idea. In this case, one of the students was wanted to use a lot of GIS, so they did a lot of like mapping, highlighting Goose Creek area. So the downtown Manchester is right here. There's the main highway. All these is land and topography, so it's hard to really see the downtown, and you had to drive through these kind of like winding roads to be able to find your places. They look into parcels adjacent to the water. They look into solar orientation, slope percentage, just to figure out what were available properties that are underutilized within the floodplain, but also near the outside the floodplain, but nearby the river, just to find opportunities for recreation.
Hey,
This
Carolina,
then, yes.
I will just interrupt just to say you'll have just a minute to wrap up.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. So they look into different sites. They look into creating these different things that they can implement along the way. Different group. It wasn't about the river, it's how to get on the river. So they look at signage, wayfinding, nodes, and connections. And they develop narratives and graphics that I think inspire some of the people and the communities. A little bit about the Maysville project is same kind of like process of looking, analyzing, going there to the site, developing this idea from greenway connecting the top of the hill to the bottom of the hill through a greenway, different nodes. That's the way that one of the ponds, detention ponds look like and how we can transform it. into something that is more a connection from the riverfront to the public library, and create the connection from that to the Ohio River by also providing a place for citizens of Maysville and tourism to visit the town. So we listen to their stories, the stories of the land, the stories of their people. We tell stories through narratives and graphics, and we hope that all these get embraced and supported and nurtured by the community. And at the end is a great exercise for students to prepare them when they for graduation. So that's about it.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Carolina.
Mhm.
Thank you. So I'll now ask Shannon Baker if you could share your screen. Shannon is Director of Design at Waterfront Toronto, and most recently, the driving force behind the Portland's Flood Protection Project, which we'll now hear about, which is a generational initiative that has set an international precedent for landscape-led climate adaptation. Shannon, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Blake. Thanks very much for the invitation. I'm very excited to share a little bit about what we've been up to over the last 9 or 10 years in Toronto in terms of design and construction of the Portlands project. Just to situate everyone before we jump in, Toronto, of course, in the heart and the south of Canada, and offering up an acknowledgement. Waterfront Toronto acknowledges the land that we undertake our revitalization efforts on as part of the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And Toronto is also home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and we acknowledge that it's covered by the Treaty 13 for the Mississaugas of the Credit. A little bit about Waterfront Toronto before we jump in. Waterfront Toronto is a quasi-governmental agency, which I know sounds like a lot of fun. We are funded by the federal government, the provincial government, and the City of Toronto, and we were formally created in 2001. We have a mandate to transform the 2,000 acres or 800 hectares of brownfield lands and areas of redevelopment along the waterfront, along Lake Ontario in the downtown of the City of Toronto. And after nearly 20 years of work on the waterfront through park design, redevelopment, and streetscape work, the Portlands Flood Protection Project is really the next phase in waterfront revitalization. The Portlands, to situate you a little bit more closely on the site, extends southeast of Toronto's downtown. So you can see in the aerial photo there the Rogers Centre, formerly known as the Sky Dome, and the CN Tower poking up there. So right southeast of that downtown hub. And we're encircled by the Toronto Islands as well as the Leslie Spit on the eastern side as well. And the Portlands itself, well, it has the potential to be an amazing extension of downtown. Up until now, it hasn't been able to be redeveloped because it's been an industrial area that was at risk of flooding and also heavily impacted by soil contamination. The work that we are doing and have done at the Portlands builds on a lot of work that's already been done. There was a park just to the north of our site that you can see with the orange hatch there. That's Corktown Common, a park designed by Michael Van Valkenburg and Associates, which has a flood protection landform in it, which protects the area towards the downtown. And before we started our work on the Portlands, the area that's hatched in blue was all at risk of flooding. So approximately 290 hectares or 715 acres of area that was at risk of flooding. And the work that we do is benchmarked by a regional storm, which in a regional storm, if it were to flow down the Don River, which is the focus of our work, the volume of water would be equivalent to about 2/3 of the volume of Niagara Falls. So a huge amount of water would flood into the area in a regional storm. So the Portlands project is an 8-year project, just wrapping up now, $1.35 billion, a landscape infrastructure project that has renaturalized the mouth of the Don River, and it's created a new river valley through the Portlands, a new island, new parks, roads, and bridges. It all begins, though, several centuries ago, many centuries ago, when this area was once the largest marsh on the Great Lakes system, the Ashbridges Marsh. And it was filled in over decades of lake filling activities at the end of the 1800s and the early 1900s. This is a shot from 1914 looking down the Keating Channel. So this is the lake filling and the channelization of the Don River. You can see off to the right-hand side, the marsh extending at that point. But several decades after that, we have what you can see here in this aerial photo that was taken in the 1970s. A lot of industrialization. The idea of the Toronto Harbour Commission was to create a vital port in the downtown, and that never really materialized, but there was a lot of heavy industry that was attracted to the area. And so after the historical lake filling, there was crude oil and petroleum refining and storage, explosives and ammunitions manufacturing, metal treatment and fabrication, as well as concrete and cement manufacturing here. So this has really left a legacy of contamination across the site. And you can also see in this photo the Don River and its channelization. So it's right at the top end of the landform there and extends straight north in a channel. The channel extends for quite a ways up the north. And the whole Don River Valley system is quite a hardened watershed because it flows through the center of the city. So it's one of a lot of flashiness, and it's prone to flooding, and a lot of sediment washes down the river as well. The work has really been decades in the making. It starts many, many years ago with a lot of community advocacy and a group called Bring Back the Don, which was a community group that engaged a lot of local politicians. Landscape architect Michael Huff was involved, and that really spurred the work which followed, which was many years of study, environmental assessment, planning frameworks, a due diligence report that Waterfront Toronto commissioned. That really set the stage for the funding that we got from the 3 levels of government. So that built the business case for this work. And in 2007, Waterfront Toronto ran a design competition for the project, which Michael van Valkenburg and Associates was successful in, and that's really guided us as we've moved through the next phases. So the rationale is really the business case that landscape architects built to sell a project to the 3 levels of government. And it is a $1.35 billion investment, but over $5 to $6 billion is reinvested back into the Canadian economy as a result of all of the spin-off economic activity that's created. We refer to the project as as a project, but really it's a program with 23 projects that make it up. So we've created a new river valley system that provides the outlet for the floodwaters, as well as a river valley system and parklands. We reconstructed 3 streets, including the Dawn roadway that you can see at letter F there, which has a flood protection landform underneath it. So that's a clay core that protects the areas to the east of the project site from flooding. A lot of municipal infrastructure as well, roads, sewers, water mains, in order to facilitate the growth that will come to this area once it's flood protected. The project starts really with a lot of excavation. As I said, the area is all lake fill, and so to begin to create that new river mouth, we had to excavate out over 1.4 million cubic meters of soil. And we were able to reuse approximately 1.2 million cubic meters of that soil through various strategies, but it's a massive amount of soil that had to be moved, and the volume of that is roughly equivalent to the amount of soil that we could fit into the Rogers Center here, which is a major league baseball stadium, and a huge area. To help you conceptualize it. The scale of the project is difficult to conceptualize, but you can see here we had mining equipment, rock trucks that were used to create the river valley, and a lot of risk management measures were employed in order to protect the river valley from the contamination that was on either side of the river. As I said, we did reconstruct 3 roads as part of this project, and that also is something that was led by landscape architects, and green infrastructure played an important role. So each of these streets have their own unique character as they've been reconstructed. Cherry Street, the new gateway into an island that we've now created. Commissioner Street, because it runs along the length of the new park frontage, has a very park-like character, and the Dawn roadway, as it flanks the river, brought its character up from the river valley system. We're also on the North American Flyway for migratory birds here, and so millions of birds fly through the city of Toronto in the summer, in the spring and in the fall. And so the Dawn roadway particularly we saw as an opportunity not only to bring in green infrastructure, but to provide refuge and food for those migratory birds as they move through. We are part of a larger green necklace of park and natural areas in the inner harbor of the city of Toronto. And so making sure that the site fits in with the rest of those ecological corridors and connections was very important. And we do have 4 signature bridges that were fabricated actually in Halifax, Canada, and moved to the site through the St. Lawrence Seaway on barges. And so that was a very exciting moment in the project when those started to come together. One of the first visible elements of the project. And so at the end of the Poor Lands project, we have created this new river valley system and extensive parklands, but also set the stage really for the new development that's to come, because the area has been lifted up out of the floodplain and will be home to thousands and thousands of people as they move into the area. Michael Van Valkenburg and Associates worked really closely with hundreds of different consultants over the course of the project, but a lot of fluvial geomorphologists, water resource engineers, and aquatic biologists were involved in the project, looking at natural ways of stabilizing the channel, really drawing from nature and those bioengineering techniques, using wood root wads, for example, and crib walls to stabilize shoreline, You can see some of those being constructed in the river valley system as it's being put together here. And of course, very important to the project is the plant communities that are throughout the river valley system, all indigenous plantings that really respond to their habitat and their place along the river valley system. A lot of constructed habitat as well throughout the river valley system to provide homes to all of the species that are moving into the river valley now. And a shot of what that river valley looked like last summer, actually. I think a testament to the power of landscape architecture that we've created this place that was once parking lots and warehouses and is now a river valley system that really looks as if it's always been there. Importantly, also is to provide those human connections. This is an area that's within walking distance of downtown Toronto, and so offers up amazing opportunities for nature connection as well. And so programming those park elements really to encourage connection with nature was important. The park was named Bidasige Park, which is Anishinaabe for the sunlight shining towards us, and was opened last summer to the public with a water ceremony and lots of exciting programming, and has really become an important hub in the city of Toronto. It's a place where people can access the water, something that wasn't really all that accessible before, and touch the water, boat on the water, and really connect with the water. It's also been an important place for the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who don't live, many of them, here in Toronto anymore, but this is their territorial land and their traditional land as well. So there are Indigenous design elements throughout the parkland for them to hold ceremony and to hold space. There are also a number of nature play elements throughout the parkland. So you can see our big snowy owl there in the background, and also the Badlands, which is a water play area that's modeled after a natural feature in the Niagara Escarpment, engaging children in play that's nature-based and offering opportunities for them, again, to connect to nature throughout the site, something that's so important. As we know, we're losing words and language for nature, and these opportunities to engage children and show them what it means to be in real connection with nature is very important. So just to give you a perspective of now what the site is beginning to look like, again, holding in your mind those warehouses and parking lots that just a few short years ago were here. The river valley has been reestablished and created, and looking forward to the future and a second opening of the next phase of the park this July, and the opening of a public art program, the Lassonde Art Trail, as well, and moving towards the next phase, which is the development of the island. The island has also been named Okwayman-Minising, which is Anishinaabe for place of the black cherry. And that island is going to become home to thousands of people over the next few decades as the island is developed out. But it offers an incredible opportunity for people to be in connection with nature and to live close to nature. And so that is informing a lot of the design work that we're doing as we move into the next phase. SLA Landscape Architects are leading this phase of the public realm development, and it's really inspired by nature, inspired by the river, and their growing streets concept, working with trophic landscape architects and Indigenous consultants, is really rooted in place and rooted in that connection to nature. So with that, I think I will wrap it up, Blake, and pass it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you very much. Just a beautiful project, a powerful example too of just the scale at which we can work and the impact that people can have when they put their minds to it. So finally, I'll introduce our last speaker. Maria Gabriela Travato is Associate Professor and Program Leader at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences. She's Adjunct Associate Professor at the American University of Beirut in Lebanon and Visiting Professor at the Politecnico di Milano. Her research on landscape justice, traditional ecological knowledge, and anti-fragile design in conflict-affected territories across the Mediterranean and Middle East will extend our conversation today. Defending traditional ecological knowledge is a foundation for building resilience in any landscape. So thank you, Maria. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Blake. I will go straight to the presentation, and I move from the interesting topic that have been presented before me to the situation of crisis and disasters. Crises are unfortunately spread everywhere, and we moved from a single crisis to multiple crises and to an overlapping also of effect that are related with those crises. And as unfortunately we well understood, all of these crises are related with the capitalistic economy, production, circulation, and consumption patterns of our societies. All of these disasters that are spread everywhere, unfortunately, around the world, are creating spaces where there is this reproduction and mutation of crisis. And on top of that, the simultaneity of such disastrous events are so impacting that planners, government, but also international development agencies are facing trouble on addressing all of these issues at the same time. But what all of these crises are showing clearly is that there is an interconnectedness between the nature of crisis in our landscape. My research focuses on the Mediterranean region. That is also the area from where I'm from, because I come from Sicily, that is just in the middle. And where I spent the most part of my life, no matter I have traveled a lot, but and now I'm in the northern part of Europe, but the Mediterranean is still the region where my research is based. And over there, unfortunately, there is an overlapping of crises. We have at the same time war and climate. We have forced displacement, environmental collapse, and climate shocks. And if we look a little bit at numbers around the Mediterranean, the region is inhabited at least by 2020 by 522 million persons, and 1/3 of these live on the coast. And on the coast, the majority of challenges, but also the majority of activity and resources are located. In fact, it's precisely along the coast that the 30% of the global tourism is located. And in the Mediterranean basin, it is located at 30% of the world's maritime traffic. On top of that, if we look at the sea in itself, not only at the region that create the Mediterranean, there has been an overfishing issue. And if we look at data from 2020 to 2021, we passed from 73% to 58%. This creating issue related with the equilibrium in the marinescape. Moving further, the coast and the area around the coast in the Mediterranean is at high risk. There are several issues like the coastline erosion, the flooding, the biodiversity loss, and water scarcity, over tourism. I mean, several things. And obviously, there has been a lot of research, thinking, and indication on how to adapt to all of these crises, but unfortunately, the effective adaptation required a more tailored risk assessment and improved governance, while today most of these adaptations are based on more engineering type of effect. The Mediterranean is also being considered as one of the most responsive regions to global climate change. And if you see the graph, you can see that the blue, I mean the dark spot are the areas that are more affected, and the ones that are experiencing the more stress due to the climate change. On top of that, there has been an intensification of extreme atmospheric and marine events that are known as Medicane, that it means Mediterranean hurricanes, that are determining extensive coastal flooding and storm surges. And one of these events happened just a few months ago in January 2026. And this event has precisely created a lot of disastrous event in the area in between Sicily and Calabria, then in the south of Italy, in Sardinia, but also in other part of the Mediterranean, because the cyclone took over all of this area. The research and the case I will present today to you is precisely how the Medicane affected the Ionic coast of Messina, and here is the Strait of Messina. This is how it looked like. The area is a flat area with a conurbation that is linear along the coast. That is the only flat area, and this part is interrupted, but a series of seasonal rivers that are called torrent. What's happened with the hurricane? The waves were not only strong in terms of power, but they were really high, and some of them reached also the 12 meters, destroying all the waterfront, taking over all the sand on the beach, and flooding the first part of the cities or the towns that are located just along the coast. And you can see here, this was the situation before, where you have this built city and the roads, and then the beach. And this is how it was after the Medicaid struck. And you can see that all this area has been totally destroyed, with the water reaching directly to the street and to the wall that has been built decades ago, just to repair the street from the waves. And these are images of the day after, and the type of destruction that the Medicaid created along all the coast. Then what happened the day after? And I mean, this is something that you can find everywhere around the world when disaster event happen. That the first to start repairing and adjusting are the communities, and then everyone came together in order to clean, to help the people that were mostly affected. But the issue is that we passed from a situation in which there was a beach, a touristic area, to a disaster, to something that is still unclear. Because, I mean, the first things that happen is to go back to the same situation. But was there the situation? I mean, how was the situation before? The elderly remember a really long beach with at least 150 meters of beach, but the beach is not there anymore. And then there are memories coming from the locals living over there. And there is also this aspiration of going back to something that is not there anymore. But at the same time, politicians came. And they were saying to everyone, let's reconstruct, and you will see that everything will be back as before. But how it was really before? In reality, if we look at these images, the waterfront was a road that separated the build from the beach. And this road was really trafficked. There was no green. It was a parking in most of the time, and there was no shade. That was really a good condition, the situation before the Medicaid. And do we really want to go back to how it was before, knowing that also the beach is shrinking every season more and more? These are some images of what is happening. Then the mayors of all these towns are saying that they are working in order to reopen a road that is really important for the traffic in this part of the coast. But this is a kind of reconstruction that is based only on trying to recover something that already was not working, and it's mostly technical. And this is how, I mean, the image that I showed before is really how the reconstruction normally works. That is framed predominantly as a technical, economic, and infrastructural challenge. And this is the reason why the first things that has already happened is to rebuild the street and to rebuild the water and sewage infrastructures that have been destroyed. But this area has all the ecological concerns, all the community relations have not been taken in consideration, as unfortunately it happened the day after reconstruction. But this area is true that, I mean, an event disastrous as this one never happened before, but already has passed through a different series of small, let's call it disasters, with waves reaching the first row of the build, normally during the fall. Then it is good, and it is the most effective way of reconstructing everything so fast without looking at the strategies that are integrating all the elements that are together are creating this environment. This is a question that, together with the Polytechnic of Milan, we are working on. We are trying to establish tables where politicians, together with the mayors of the towns, and together also with the technicians, can work together to rethink a way of repairing this area and not going back to how it was. And we are debating on how it is the traditional reconstruction versus an approach that can take landscape as a method, but also as a tool for a socio-ecological recovery. Looking at how the goal are different, because in the traditional reconstruction, the aim is to restore the pre-crisis condition, but we have seen that this condition, the majority of the case, are not the good one. That while the landscape social ecological recovery has an aim to transform towards a more resilience and equity landscape. On the other hand, also the land in the traditional reconstruction is considered as a passive surface to be repaired. But land is not only this. As landscape architects, we know how important is land as a relational and active medium. And also considering the time, the politicians want to recover everything, to reconstruct everything as soon as possible. But we know that it's important to take time in order to integrate memories, to integrate the multi-species relational way of considering our landscape. And I will conclude with this table in which we have tried to put together and to frame this landscape approach for a socio-ecological repair, considering the socio-environmental and climate justice framework versus democracy and responsible governance. In Europe, we have the European Landscape Convention that has positioned as an important tool for a good governance and management of our territories, the participatory approach. But in the majority of the case, it's not really implemented, or it is considered as a box to be checked. But instead, we are aiming versus a more democratic type of landscape in which we take in consideration the right of the land, the right of nature, and the right to nature. And we are looking also at more urban climate justice, because when there are such disastrous events, the more deprived communities or part of communities are the ones that are taking the major trouble on their shoulders. And we want to look at design as an activism. Sorry, I went back. I don't know how to go back. Yeah. And we want to look at design as activism, in which we look at open public spaces in order to create resilient, multifunctional, and productive landscape. And we hope that this approach can be shared and used also in other contexts around the Mediterranean region, where unfortunately this overlapping of crises and when I think of crisis, I also include specifically also the conflict that are happening in the eastern Mediterranean side, and to try to imagine a recovery and reconstruction that has a different logic than the top-down approach. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Maria Gabriela. And thank you to all of those amazing presentations. What an amazing breadth of work and depth of work that we've seen. It's incredible. So thank you all very much. I'd like to ask Dr. Heike Rahman to join the conversation. Heike, you've been listening intently despite the late night for you, and we're fortunate to hear some of your reflections. And I know we are running over time, but please share your thoughts, and we'll have some discussion afterwards.
Thank you. Yeah, first of all, I'm joining you from Naarm, Melbourne, the unceded lands of the Eastern Kulin Nation, the people of the Woiwurrung and Bunurong language groups. And I would like to pay my respect and acknowledge their ancestors, elders past and present. Yeah, it was quite fascinating breadth of ideas and projects that were presented through the four presentation, and particularly Shannon's presentation stuck with me, coming from sort of this Australian Melbourne context and saying, oh, this the ambition and the time frame and the commitment in that project is quite extraordinary. I think there's some overlap to Maria's presentation there as well, in the way in which we start to work with politics, in the political realm, and how we work with governments, and the economic side of it. So I was just wondering, Shannon, from your perspective in that project, and from reflecting on your work, what do you envision counts really in this project as innovation and landscape practice that really drove that project so far? And you mentioned at the beginning part the relationship to the business case to achieve the funding that actually set the ground to get this all rolling and get the process going. So yeah, what do you reckon counts as innovation, and who gets to define this and achieving the outcomes?
Well, I feel like this might be cheating a little bit, Heike, but I think the whole project counts as innovation.
Totally. Yeah.
There was no precedent when we started for building a river in a brownfield. No permitting process, no regulatory framework. The whole thing had to be kind of worked out as we were moving through the project. And it's also the scale of the project, and the fact that creating a new 1 kilometer long river mouth is one thing, but also cleaning $300 million worth of soil and building 3 new streets and bridges and parks and all of these things happening within the same construction project, and having to be sequenced was incredibly challenging. And also, I can't underline enough that landscape architects led at every stage of this project, from the community advocacy and the visioning at the beginning of the project that was, closing in on, I think, 40 years ago, I guess now, all the way through the due diligence work, the design competitions, and through to the leadership here at Waterfront Toronto, and my role as a landscape architect, as the director of the project, and into construction and the construction manager that had landscape architects on staff to do that work. And so, what also is innovative, I think, in Canada here is landscape architects as leaders and as being perfectly positioned to do that because of the way that we approach things and the systems-based thinking that we bring to a project.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's really showing within the complexity of the project as well, and that kind of systems thinking all the way through. I guess, Maria, you are in a quite different situation, and I think the urgencies there that you presented make the actions, or it's decreasing the time frame somehow, and the urgencies that you in terms of the actions that you need have certain urgencies to get sorted relatively quickly. So you're mitigating and restoring and reconstructing the coastline. At the same time, so the situation there is different because you are acting within this situation where the lot of stakeholders have already quite established kind of ideas about memories and what they want, politicians being involved in driving certain agendas as well. So I was quite interested in this way in which you said, actually, it's not necessarily the design outcome that's so important. It's actually the process that we're setting here to allow politicians to work with the communities in this kind of alliance, if you like, but then led through a particular landscape representation or landscape reading. I was wondering in this regard then, to work with ideas around climate resilience, coastal reconstruction. Oftentimes we probably find ourselves in this way in which we contextualize these issues in a global sense, and sort of learn through case studies, and you were looking at sort of different contexts as well in the process. So in that process, we often drive conversation through transferable principles that we're looking for, but oftentimes they seem to be flattening both ecological as well as cultural differences. Now, looking at the Mediterranean situation there, I'm just wondering whether you find that working towards those standardized kind of frameworks that we might be finding in other places in the world in terms of these reconstruction processes are actually helpful, or whether there is actually something within the context in which you're operating that requires maintaining the difference in a way, sort of maintaining really the kind of local sort of knowledge, wisdom, and the understanding of the relationship between community and politics. The situation is quite.
Yeah, you're right. Because it's easy to take pre-confession already designed solutions and try to implement it over there. The idea is different, is also to have on board different specialization and looking at the overall territory, not only this flat line of land along the coast. We know, based on studies that have been done by other technicians, that the problems is also related with the presence of these seasonal rivers that in the by the end of last centuries have been all cementified and channeled. This has decreased the amount of detritus reaching the sea and feeding the coast and the beach. And while the beach is shrinking and shrinking, obviously the power of the waves is becoming stronger. It's also important to look at the history of this territory. I added the issue of justice because the day after all of this disaster, the first things and the first titles on the journals were, okay, there have been a disasters because everything was illegal. We are in Sicily. And I mean, that's not a reality. All of these towns have more than 100 years. They have been built correctly back to then. But the engineering type of work that have been done in our territories has created the situation that we are facing today. Plus, climate change has intensified the problematic. Then it's not enough to take some measures that in other parts of the world are working. It is important to really make an effort and to read the territory and the landscape in which the problematic arose in order to combine the different situation and take in consideration also what the elderly people remember about this area, because they have a lot of knowledge and respect that we forget about it. And now, I mean, I didn't show you images, but all at the beach normally during summer is full of structures that are temporarily built. But I mean, I remember my grandmom saying, the sea is a great resource, but we have to fear the sea. And I mean, there was a kind of respect because it was important, but also an understanding that the power of nature is something that as human we have to take in consideration while creating or transforming our land. And I think that this is not well taken in consideration, and we still believe that with some engineering implementation, we can solve and we can go ahead. On top of that, we have to consider that the landscape profession, at least in Italy, and especially in the south, of Italy is not so well considered or taken in consideration. And then when certain problems arose, then the first that are asked to intervene are engineering. And already, for example, the University of the nearby city, Catania, has been already involved also before the disasters in order to do an extensive study on engineering structure to be constructed in the sea. Then I think we need to change the mentality and to think at forms of adaptation that are targeting specifically this territory.
Yeah, that's a good point, I guess. This relationship to engineering in and of itself, but also the approach that we're taking towards problem solving rather than sort of the broader understanding of the systems that we have and the wisdom that we have long lost in a way. Brings me to my last question. Conscious about time now as well, but I thought I might want to ask a question to Caroline as well. Because in the US, in I believe it was 2023, landscape architecture profession has been reclassified as a STEM profession. And I was wondering, reflecting on these past 3 years, what impact this reclassification might have had on the education and design profession, and in particular, what forms of knowledge you will see within the design practice that can be produced that the science side alone cannot contribute to the issues that we're facing when we're talking about climate crisis. And more specifically, I think, and that's coming through your studio environment as well, how speculative or culturally and narrative dimensions of design can contribute to resilience.
So I think in the past year we have seen a quite increase on our student body, like entry-level students, and maybe that's because it's the qualification in STEM profession. So we used to go from maybe 15 students entering our program to having to be more selective on the process. And now we get around 25, 28 students as entry-level students. So I see a lot of growth on our profession, but it still is very difficult. I hear what the previous conversation, it's very difficult for the general public to show what landscape architects can do. And every time we go to a small town, it's the same conversations. Let's call the engineers to help us figure out what to do. And I think there is a part in landscape architecture, which is that combination of, yes, the science and the engineer portion of it, but really understanding and reading the communities and the land. And when we do all these summer multidisciplinary projects, the landscape architecture students are the one that glue everything. So they take the lead on, I guess we think more holistic and we think about all these different pieces that can make the whole. Um, yes, so I think our profession can lead a lot of these projects, but also in collaboration with engineers. I think we're the first in our projects, we're the first ones to plant that seed of visualizing and dreaming about uh, something better for these communities, and then either the division of water engineers can do all their studies on how much water will these detention areas could handle. And I think it's a back and forth process of working with partners and different teams just to make these things work.
Great, thank you. Uh, Blake, I'm conscious about time, so I stop it here
Yes.
and hand over back to
I
you.
I think it's a perfect time to stop. Amy did have to drop off the call too, so your questions were pointed and were really wonderful responses and observations from you. And thank you all again so much for all the work that you do and your contributions here today. Being exposed to it, I know for our professions and through IFLA, being able to open up these conversations to the public is really important for exactly that point, Carolina, that you're making at the end. So, um, thank you all again. I will acknowledge we've had some comments coming in the chat. And Donna, I think some of your points that you made were almost directly addressed, related to the engineering. Um, so thank you all again. I really appreciate it, and all the best.
Thank you.
We'll see you
Thank
soon.
you. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Thanks, Blake.
Bye.
That was great.